Someone who has shaped how I think in numerous ways is here, and I am excited. My name is Brittany Page, and this is another interview edition of the Page Perspective. Dr. Allen Frances is my guest today, and you may know him from headlines criticizing the field of psychology or Donald Trump, even going so far as to write an entire book responding to the chorus of people who call Donald Trump mentally ill. Don't worry, we talk about all of this, but just in case you don't know who he is, he's a psychiatrist. He is the former chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Duke. He's the former chair of the DSM-4 task force. The DSM is this book right here, this hefty book right here, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It is what we use to diagnose in the mental health field. He had a direct role in shaping the diagnoses in that manual, and it's part of our discussion today. Given his new op-ed in the New York Times, autism rates have increased 60-fold. I played a role in that. Dr. Frances feels very strongly about RFK Jr., as you'll hear in a moment. And I just have to say that I discovered Dr. Frances before I entered my graduate program in clinical psychology, where I trained to be a therapist. 3 years in my graduate program, 3,000 supervised hours, and 1 state licensing exam later, and I am still a licensed therapist. And Dr. Frances's work was inspiring to me when I started that journey. He has always been extremely generous with his time, from taking time to chat with me about one of my grad school presentations on a chapter in the DSM for my psychopathology class, to interviews on my podcast, I Doubt It, to now this interview. I appreciate his take on many things, but most notably what he has to say about the medicalization of ordinary life, our increasingly common tendency to pathologize normal responses to things that should conjure negative emotions or responses in us. And yes, we talk about that too. He continues to be an inspirational figure, and I'm happy he took the time to chat with me, and I think you'll enjoy this conversation. And now we're joined by Dr. Allen Frances. Dr. Frances, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Brittany.
I appreciate it. So you recently wrote this New York Times op-ed about RFK Jr., and of course he's been advancing these conspiracy theories about autism, talking about how it's an epidemic, talking about vaccines, hiring vaccine skeptics. It's kind of a scary time. I'm assuming the scary time, the scary nature of everything is what prompted you to write this article right now?
Yeah, I mean, I feel kind of responsible and felt that it was necessary to try to step in and make clear that his assertions are absolutely nutty. So one thing he says is true. The rate of autism has increased by about 60 times in the last 30 years. That's absolutely true. But what he doesn't know about autism is almost everything. The rate has increased not because of vaccines. That has been disproven over and over again. The original perpetrator of the idea, Wakefield, was discredited and chased out of England. The article that started this whole nonsense off was retracted by the Lancet. Research paper after research paper makes absolutely clear that vaccines do not cause autism. And the main reason for writing the article was to make that clear to parents. Don't stop vaccinating your kids on the crazy notion that it will cause autism. How I was responsible and how that impacts on Kennedy's conspiracy theory. DSM-3 had a very tight definition of autism. Mm-hmm. You had to have an onset before the age of 3. The impairments in interpersonal functioning, in cognitive functioning and behavioral, they were absolutely disabling. There was no way in the world that you could mistake a kid who suffered from autism, as it was defined in DSM-3, from a normal kid or from any other mental disorder. In DSM-4, because some kids had milder versions and they were missing out on school services and treatment, we added a new diagnosis called Asperger's, and it was a milder representation of some of the same symptoms. We anticipated, after careful field trials, that this would increase the rate of autism 3 times, from about 1 in 2,500 to about 1 in 800. Within 10 years, the rate had jumped to 1 in 130, and now it's 1 in 31.
Right.
What had been a condition that happened maybe 1 in 3,000 kids, now 1 in every 31 kids. And the reason for this is that we made the definition much looser. That made it much easier for people to confuse autism with normal eccentricity and social avoidance. It made it possible for school services to be given to kids who otherwise wouldn't have gotten it, which was good for them, but may have led to a misallocation of resources. And it encouraged a kind of internet industry of self-diagnosis of autism. So many people who before would have felt that they were shy or maybe a little eccentric, now they had a diagnosis to explain their behaviors. And so the whole thing has exploded, not because of vaccines, but because of definitional change, the availability of school services, and the internet.
And I think because RFK is so prone to conspiratorial thinking that even if he were to listen to your answer there, that he would ascribe some sort of nefarious intent to widening the diagnostic criteria, opening it, making it more loose. What would you say to people who are listening to that? I mean, your intentions were good, right? The people who made that decision, their intentions were good.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions and unintended consequences.
Indeed.
And what we were trying to do was to help kids who didn't have the full syndrome, but was still very much impaired, to get school services and treatment.
Yeah.
And we assumed that if the rate went from 1 in 2,500 to 1 in 800, something like that, that would be a good, that those kids were definitely going to need those services, both educational and medical, and that we were doing them a favor. And we were, that some of the increase is due to better identification and better treatment. But we had no idea that it would get blown out of proportion the way it did. And autism spectrum has almost become a badge of honor in some places, an indication of tech brilliance. It's become an explain-all for all sorts of emotional distress and life problems. And I could live with that, although it's harmful for people, and we'll get to that in a minute. It's harmful for some of the people who are mislabeled. But the vaccine thing is an absolute disaster. The overdiagnosis of autism, the stigmatization that comes from that, harms some people. And I feel badly about that. But the vaccination craziness could lead to terrible public health problems.
So do you think it is incumbent upon mental health professionals to be out there talking about this, to try to correct for some of this misinformation that's being advanced by, again, our Secretary of Health and Human Services, terrifying thought, RFK Jr.?
Yeah, I think if you searched the wide world to pick the very worst person to head U.S. health policy, which in effect is also a major contributor to world health policy because we're the biggest funder, you could not find someone worse than Robert Kennedy. And I don't think anyone on saying whatever they would say with whatever expertise will ever change his mind. I think that that's a foregone conclusion. And as long as he's in charge of the government health services, they will do disastrous things. They've done disastrous things with the CDC, with the NIH, and they will continue to do disastrous things. I have no hope that my voice will change their mind, and I have little hopes they'll change anyone's mind, but I just felt a responsibility. And the main message to parents is vaccinate your kids. The main message to people who've gotten the diagnosis is autism is something you may feel you can't do anything about. Social awkwardness is something that's pretty easy to treat. And many people with social awkwardness have been diagnosed as autistic and give up hope of ever being able to have a better relationship with people in the world. And that's unfortunate. Reducing self-expectations because of mislabeling is very unfortunate. And for many people, the social avoidance part, the social awkwardness part, is very treatable. And don't let a misdiagnosis of autism prevent you from doing the kinds of treatment that can make that part of your life much richer.
Well, and that's actually a great point, because when I first discovered your work, I was just starting grad school, and it was around the time that your book Saving Normal was published. And the full title of that is Saving Normal: An Insider's Revolt Against Out-of-Control Psychiatric Diagnosis, DSM-5, Big Pharma, and the Medicalization of Ordinary Life. And you know, it's not very popular to talk about the medicalization of normal right now. What's popular is to be a therapist create a TikTok account and start making videos about the 5 ways to identify a narcissist, or the 6 ways that you're a codependent, or here's how to detect your personality disorder in 3 steps. What would you say to people who are consuming this kind of content to help them navigate this new world of self-diagnosis, of consuming content online and hearing something that might resonate but not knowing what to do with it?
Well, buyer beware that psychiatric diagnosis is not written in stone. It should be written in pencil, especially in younger people. That the diagnostic accuracy of many of the labels is questionable. The agreement amongst clinicians is often low. And there's no worse way of making a diagnosis than reading something on the internet and deciding, aha, that's me. There's always distress and problems in life, everyday problems in life, and there are psychiatric symptoms that are hard for people to understand. And there's a strong wish to have an answer. It feels good if you get a diagnosis. This explains it. And when that diagnosis is accurate, that's a wonderful moment, because it leads to a possible course of action, a treatment plan, and maybe you're not the only person in the world who had this problem. You're not uniquely damned, and we can do something for you. It's a wonderful moment when it's accurate. When the label's inaccurate, which very often it is these days, it means a wild goose chase towards treatments that often make no sense. It means missing an opportunity to target what really is the problem, because you're dealing with all sorts of false explanations for the problem. It means getting 5 diagnoses. It often means getting 5 different medications, all sorts of ridiculous internet cures, medicinal and therapeutic. So my attitude is that we should be very conservative with diagnosis. We shouldn't be over-diagnosing. We should think twice. We should recheck our original hypothesis. That's the idea of writing it in pencil. Once a diagnosis gets in a medical chart, it tends to live there forever, however wrong it was. And people often collect a whole bevy, a handful of misdiagnoses over their careers that are never erased. It's very easy to give a diagnosis. It's very hard to take one away. So we should always be underdiagnosing, especially in kids, because their problems are much less stable. They change much more rapidly as they develop with time. We should be cautious with diagnosis, not clinicians carelessly diagnosing and patients reading something and saying, aha, that's me.
Well, and on that note, what are the 5 ways that you can tell your mom's a narcissist?
One of the 100 ways you can tell that Trump is a narcissist, but
I want to ask you about that too.
I think that it's easy to see yourself in every diagnosis, because as humans, we have a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
But for it to be a clinical diagnosis, it has to be severe. It has to be enduring. It has to occur pervasively in a whole variety of situations. And the problem is that people come up with an explain-all. Whenever there's a rapid increase in any diagnosis, undoubtedly a lot of that is fad mislabeling. That just as everything else in life has fashions, psychiatric diagnoses have fashions. The 2 today that are most popular are ADHD and autism, and especially in adults. Most of the people get labeled for the first time as adults as having ADHD or having autism. For the most part, that's misdiagnosis these days. And in both cases, it can lead to dangerous misdirection.
Yeah. Well, you are kind of known as this iconoclastic figure in the field. I mean, you were critical of the DSM-5. You don't agree with that? Yeah, no?
I'm a mainstream kind of guy.
Okay. Some people would disagree with that. And there may be people listening to this who are like, okay, interesting. He's critical of big pharma. He's critical of expanding diagnoses. He's critical of these various things within the field. And then they would look at RFK and say, he's also critical of big pharma. He's also critical of these things. And they may not be able to distinguish between the two, even though I am. I just want to make that clear. I am able to distinguish between the two. But what would you say to someone who is struggling with that balance, maybe, who maybe is inclined towards some conspiratorial thinking? Because even within our field, there's people who like full on reject the DSM, right? There's not just this balanced critique of it. What is the principle? What is the guiding value that helps you maintain that balance?
Be in the middle. So that in terms of DSM, I see myself as a conservative psychiatrist protesting against a rapid expansion of the field without evidence to justify it. The difference between RFK and me, I see myself as very critical of pharmaceutical companies. The one home run they hit was vaccine for COVID. That was a remarkable achievement.
Yeah.
For him to say, well, okay, drug companies are bad, therefore every product they ever make for every disorder is bad. If people had listened to him during COVID, there would have been several 100,000 additional deaths in the US. There will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, additional deaths in the US with the next pandemic because we won't be prepared with a vaccine. So is the drug company, the pharmaceutical industry, something we should blindly trust? Obviously not. Is it something that we should blindly distrust? Equally opposite not. That certain drugs are absolutely life-saving and we should treasure them, but we should also point out the hype that surrounds many other drugs that are really there just to make profits, not to help patients.
Right. There was also something you said early on about the human tendency to seek certainty and want answers. And it seems like you also check that impulse in yourself and you're okay with there being a gray area or you're okay with there being certainty. Would you say that's true?
There's nothing better in the world than there's nothing worse in the world than false certainty, and nothing better than healthy skepticism and willingness to accept uncertainty. Most people presenting with psychiatric disorders do not have a clear diagnosis the first time you see them. And seeing them for 15 minutes and giving them a diagnosis is much more likely to lead to harm than to benefit. I have a utilitarian view toward diagnosis. Will this diagnosis be useful for this person? And by and large, that means being cautious, seeing the person so you really get to know them over time, seeing them so you know their context. A lot of the problems people present with are contextual, not psychiatric diagnosis, but troubles with finances, stresses from family problems, from divorces, unemployment, poverty. These create problems for people that aren't necessarily psychiatric disorders. They're contextual problems. And you can't really be accurate about understanding the relationship unless you know the patient. And you can't know the patient if you're seeing them for 15 minutes and making a diagnosis. And the patient can't know themselves if they've read something on the internet and decide, aha, that's me.
I also am thinking about the resurgence of conservatives talking about how we need to bring back institutionalization, and specifically with what you were talking about with knowing the context of the person that you're treating. A lot of times context can also be the political moment that someone is living in, right? Do they have access to cover their basic needs? Are we as a society attending to people's basic needs and ensuring that they have housing, ensuring that they have healthcare, ensuring that they have these things that can make them lead fulfilling lives? When you hear the talk of institutionalization in response to the homelessness crisis right now, particularly from conservatives, what do you think about?
Well, we definitely need more beds. There's no question about that. In the 1960s, we had something like 700,000 psychiatric beds in this country. Too many. Now we have about 35,000, way too few. And we also have maybe 250,000 psychiatric patients in prison. So what's happened is that with the deinstitutionalization, with the feds getting out of supporting mental health care, so what Trump is doing now, cutting the budget in terrible ways, Reagan did in 1980. He prevented the funding of community mental health centers. And we have a tragic neglect of the severely ill. We have way too much mental health treatment for healthy people, way too little for the severely ill. And so I don't think it's a conservative issue or a liberal issue. I think we definitely need more beds, but even more and additional, we need community mental health centers. Right now, if someone is caught peeing in the street or stealing a soda from a 7-Eleven, a cop is called. And that cop will find that if he brings that individual who may be flagrantly psychotic to the emergency room, he waits for several hours and the person's discharged without a disposition because there's no place to send him. There's no treatment available. So what cops do is arrest them, bring them to jail. Mentally ill do terribly in jail. They're often in solitary confinement. They spend much more time for whatever the infraction was than most people do, and jail makes them sicker. So I'm definitely for more services, and some of those services should be inpatient, and most of them should be outpatient.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's the point that I was hung up on with the conservatism. It seems like the knee-jerk response is to say, here's someone in society that we don't want to see. We're currently seeing visible poverty. We don't want to be seeing that. Let's just lock it away and deal with it in that way. And it seems not to be in the best interest of the person who's actually suffering. It seems to be motivated by ill intent. At least that's my perspective.
Mine is good intent. First of all, mentally ill people die from illness, die from exposure, die from cops shooting them because cops are the first responders. They're scared when they go out with a mentally ill person. They don't know who has a gun because everyone has guns these days. Being homeless is no bargain. And I'm not an advocate for, just locking people up and throwing away the key, but I think that we definitely need to provide treatment for people who are psychotic and unable to form good judgments for themselves. We need to be able to do most of this on an outpatient basis. So the number of beds increased would never be back to where we were. It would just be to a number that works. And the most important thing is if someone's psychotic, there should be a mental health solution, not a correctional prison solution for that problem. Right now,
Absolutely.
we've just criminalized being mentally ill.
Absolutely. I want to ask you one brief question. I know you wrote a book because I interviewed you about it years ago. Twilight of American Sanity, a psychiatrist analyzes the age of Trump. For people who are still saying that Donald Trump is mentally ill, you say?
He's crazy like a fox. He's one of the most narcissistic people maybe in the history of the world. He's one of the most evil people in the history of the world. I think that to judge him as mentally ill is an insult to the mentally ill. That to be lumped with someone like him, most mentally ill people are well-meaning, good people. Trump is neither of those. Most mentally ill people are not evil. Most mentally ill people are not dangerous. Trump is all of those. So he doesn't suffer from the distress and disability of being a narcissistic, grandiose person. He's rewarded for it. And all through every step of his career, being that evil person he is has brought him great rewards. That's not mental disorder. It's evil.
Well, I think that's a mic drop, and we should end it there. Dr. Francis, I can't say about how much I admire you, how much I appreciate your work. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you being here today. My
pleasure. Thank you. The main thing for the message for me is don't listen to Robert Kennedy about vaccination. That is the most important single message that I hope. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.